Chair, we're now live.
Thank you, Liz. A warm welcome to those attending, also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Resident Services Select Committee. My name is Councillor Peter Smallwood and I am the chair of this meeting. A key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. Please note that the members of this committee will be using tablets and laptops to view the agenda today. Housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm goes off, please follow officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. For those in the room, please switch mobile phone devices to silent as the meeting starts. Resident feedback forms. For those watching via YouTube, if you are so minded, you complete one of our resident feedback forms. These can be found in the information section underneath the YouTube video. These forms are intended to help us improve the way we run our meetings. Now, we move on to the attendees of the meeting, and if we could all introduce ourselves with my colleague starting to my right.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Hector Gohill.
Good evening, Councillor Darren Davies.
Good evening, Councillor Jestod.
Good evening, Richard Webb, Director of Community Safety and Enforcement.
Good evening, Kenny McCamley from APCOA Parking Services.
Good evening, Kedar Martin from APCOA Parking.
Good evening, Happy New Year. Ian Thine, Head of Environmental Specialists.
Kerry Lamoureux, Head of Finance.
Bernard Offeretta, Head of Finance.
Good evening, Matt Davis, Director, Strategic and Operational Finance.
Steve Muldoon, Corporate Director of Finance.
Dan Kennedy, Corporate Director of Resident Services.
Good evening, Councillor Jagdi Singh.
Oh, hello. Councillor Elizabeth Garelik.
Councillor Kamal Preet Kaur.
And Liz Penny, Democratic Services Officer.
Can I particularly welcome our friends from APCOA for giving up their evening to be here. Thank you, you're very welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you later on. Before we begin, I just wanted to make a couple of comments to the committee about the next few months and how things are going to run, and I've had a chat with Councillor Kaur about this, the opposition lead. Can I start by paying tribute to Councillor Bridges, the former chairman of this committee, who I think diligently and fairly chaired this committee over many years, and congratulate him on his elevation to becoming the cabinet member for resident services. He's in the room, so I'm going to embarrass him as well. Can I also thank Councillor Farley for his time as the opposition lead. I think he did that excellently, always diligently, and I'd like to thank him for his contribution to this committee. I'd like to welcome Councillor Singh and Councillor Dott to the committee, and we look forward to the contributions that you are going to make. As you may remember, we had a brief discussion in this committee considering whether we should do a mini review, and we talked about doing pavement parking, as I like to call it, in consultation with the officers. Just as Councillor Bridges was leaving the chairmanship to become the cabinet member, it was felt that that was going to be quite a meaty review to do in such a short space of time. And it would have been, given the closeness to the end of the administration, it would have been unfair to do that, and we wouldn't have been able to do it properly. We are going to not do a mini review. However, we are going to, and I've spoken to Councillor Kaur about this, focus as much as we can on maybe like meaty topics that we can get into, like mini reviews. So this time we have our friends from APCOA, so we're going to talk about parking enforcement. You will see from the work programme that waste services will be the February thing, and I have invited, I wouldn't go as far to say summoned, but I've invited Councillor Bridges to rejoin us and lead off with the corporate director on that item, and that will be an opportunity for members to do some extra scrutiny on that and maybe give some examples. In March, I'd like to invite our friends in to do a community safety and cohesion thing. We usually do that in and around that time of year with the police, but I thought we should get the fire service into Faith, and if members have other ideas about people that are involved in community cohesion, please pass those through Liz to me, and I'd be delighted to get them in and a chance for people to do that. And in April, We'll look at the topic of HMOs, which is very topical in the council at the moment, and Councillor Tuckwell has agreed to join us for that meeting. So an opportunity for members to do extra scrutiny. I hope that will be met warmly by all. Let me just go back to my notes. We're going to stick to pretty much how Councillor Bridges ran these meetings. If we've got external partners, if it's a budget thing, although we haven't got a review, but if it's a budget item or we've got external partners, we will let them present a short presentation on there, and then we'll jump straight to questions. As Ian will know well, if it's an officer having done a paper, I'd hope that members would have read that paper and we can jump straight to the questions to allow more time for the scrutiny of that. Again, it will be one question, as Councillor Bridges allowed, followed by a follow-up, which you don't have to do your follow-up, but we'll do then. So business as usual. Okay, let's move on to apologies for absence. Liz.
No apologies this evening, Chair.
Thank you very much. We now move to declarations of interest. Anybody have any declarations? No? Flying through it. To receive the minutes of the previous meeting. Anybody got any comments, or are those agreed? Thank you, committee. Fantastic. Item 4 is to confirm that the items of the business marked as Part 1 will be considered in public, and those marked 2 will be considered in private. This evening, all of our items are in Part 1. We now move on to agenda item 5, where I invite the Corporate Director, Dan Kennedy, to present on the Month 7 monthly budget and spend report. Dan.
Thank you, Chair. As in the spirit of your introduction, I won't repeat the detail of the paper, but I'll pick out some highlights. And it's you had the paper before you. I'd like to highlight the headline, which is that the projected overspend net position of 7.8 million for the services, the budget within the remit of this committee, which is largely unchanged from month 6, and the pressures are largely driven by homelessness demand pressures, which have been previously reported to this committee. We have continued to take a number of proactive actions during the year, and I suppose to give you sort of an early headline, one of the initiatives was around trying to control temporary accommodation costs by putting in place caps and other controls, and that has, on the face of it, has delivered a cost reduction of nearly £8 per unit per night, which sums to just over £2 million of cost avoidance during the year. That's one of the initiatives, but nevertheless it continues to remain exceptionally challenging trying to secure alternative accommodation in the private rented sector, and also other forms of affordable housing, particularly social rented, when the demand is so high. So we are continuing to manage that as best we can, but it does prove to be challenging, mainly driven by evictions from private rented accommodation, evictions by friends and family, and also, sadly, families who are fleeing domestic abuse, who present to the council. In the next item, we have made a number of proposals to address those pressures, which include growth proposals and rebasing, but also a whole range of other initiatives as well, which for next year, which include new initiatives to access more private rented accommodation, continuing our programme. We've had a very ambitious programme this year to acquire additional social rented properties, and also work with our partners in the housing associations to increase supply. However, I just need to let the committee know it's extremely challenging, like it is for many other London boroughs and other local authorities across the country. However, we won't give up. We will continue to do what we need to and be innovative where we can. In terms of other areas, the housing revenue account is reporting a break-even position. And we are maintaining our reserves position at 15 million, which is good. The committee should also note that the report includes a savings update, and so within the remit of this committee, it's 11.7 million. This is a savings target. Almost half is banked or on track at 5.6 million, and another further 3.5 million, 30% is marked as amber. Currently will be delivered, but may be delivered not fully this financial year. And there's also elements within that savings programme which will be undeliverable, and and actually will be written out of the council's budget, some of which are legacy savings targets. But I won't say any more than that, and just invite questions at this point, Chair.
Thank you. I'm now going to move to questions. Just to remind the committee, this is questions around the month 7 position of this year's budget, not about the budget that we'll talk there. Committees I've been on this week, we've got a little bit lost sometimes on talking about the two. So has anybody got any specific questions about the current position? I'm seeing one from Councillor Gohill.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Dan, for your report. On page 20, identified a £0.9 million shortfall in the garden waste subscription income as of month 7. I was just wondering if you can confirm whether that shortfall increased between month 6 and month 7, or whether it's sort of leveled out now and we're getting a kind of year-long forecast of what it might be.
Yeah, so it's levelled out now, which is probably no real surprise given the sort of where we're at. So about roughly 1.6 million. We were hoping to achieve 2.5 million. I mean, when we first set that target, we set, given this is a brand new service, subscription service, we set the income based on the best estimates that we could at the time, looking around at other boroughs, and also given, I suppose, that we commenced the subscription service later in the year following consultation. We haven't had a full year effect. So, however, it seems to have stabilised now. We're obviously pressing and pushing for hopefully more subscriptions next year. I think from looking around at other boroughs who've been running the schemes much longer, it tends to mature over 2, 3, 4 years, and so it will be probably a gradual, steady increase over the next few years, and it will probably flatten out. But we just need to see really where that goes.
You follow up, Councillor Gohill? Councillor Core.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. We did mention, following on what Councillor Gohill said, the consultation we did meant that we were going to see that shortfall, and the shortfall is still there. But what I don't see in this report is how are we mitigating it? What steps are we taking to make sure that these shortfalls are eventually met, and the shortfalls that we see in terms of other risks that we have, like there are slippages, there are undeliverable savings. What I don't see is the replacement program, why we have it, how are we going to challenge it, and what are we going to do. There is it would have been helpful to understand if there had been like a sort of plan which says how we are going to mitigate. We just say that we're going to mitigate, but it doesn't have enough detail in it. Thank you.
I can help to answer that. I suppose specifically on some savings targets, we just have to accept that we're never going to be able to recover some of those, and you'll see on the next item that some of those targets are simply being adjusted and rebased. That's the reality. In terms of sort of in-year mitigations, working with Steve and the corporate management team, we've put in place a whole range of cost control measures around recruitment, spend control. Anything over £500 goes to a panel, so that's important. And then contracts to compliance as well. So there are a whole range of other initiatives. I mean, in the main, for example, recruitment controls have been in place for many months now, and have yielded quite significant mitigations. Some of those mitigations, again, demand-related pressures are extremely challenging to manage, and we have to, where we have statutory duties, is to continue to provide those services. And some of those mitigations, as I've set out with cost controls on temporary accommodation, are actually about how we reduce the overall cost rather than preventing or stopping the cost. So I can probably dedicate a whole committee to mitigations, so we probably don't have the time today, but I'm very happy to provide further information for the Chair if that's needed.
Thank you. Councillor Cole?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I think it just saves everybody's time if we have some granular detail, because otherwise it's just numbers on numbers. So when we know if we are improving, if we could see where the improvements are coming from, it just makes it easier for us to input into that. In terms of savings, as you said, it's mostly to do with recruitment freeze and everything. how is it impacting everyday service delivery? And there are also mentions about further redundancy. So what would be the impact on service deliveries? What assessment has been done about it? How is it affecting everyday services? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So always, whenever there is a service change, it's always subject to scrutiny from myself and other service areas such as the finance team and the HR team, as well as the corporate management team. I think our priority always is to protect and preserve and maintain frontline services and, importantly, discharge our statutory duties consistently every day. So, I mean, in terms of service change, where it's needed, there'll always be inequalities impact assessment. But I mean, in the main, the service, any changes around recruitment have actually been about in response to efficiencies and doing things differently, particularly about working across services and working collaboratively. So, you know, in everyday language, we lever more from the resources we do have, which tends to, in my experience, generate you know, much closer collaborative working across staff teams and achieving more with what you've got, rather than actually service reductions.
Thank you. Councillor Davies.
Thank you. Dan, can you just give us an update on the homelessness, where we are, how many people have we got through emergency accommodation? I believe it was around 5,000 people that were looking for emergency housing at one point. And how, just can I have an update on that and where we're at and how much it's costing and when we're going to level off, if we ever are going to?
Fingers crossed, Councillor Davis. So we have about 1,800 households in temporary accommodation, some of which is high cost, some of which is kind of neutral cost because they're placed in their own accommodation. So somewhere in the order, and it does vary, somewhere in the order of about 800 are in higher cost, not what we call nightly charged accommodation or spot purchased accommodation. And it's with those providers that we've really negotiated hard and introduced caps and been quite tough with those providers. Said, look, this is all we're going to pay. Unless you agree to our cap, we're going to find alternative accommodation, and we have done so. I mean, I really am hoping it will level off. I mean, we have been subject to a number of, I suppose, experiences or incidents completely outside of our control, such as the unexpected arrivals through Heathrow Airport, quite considerable numbers, which we're lobbying government for full funding on. But I think, I mean, the pressures are also a symptom of the wider market position as well. So we've seen landlords quite significantly increase their rents. I mean, you're talking for some families being asked, tenants being asked to pay £400-500 a month more in their rent, which is a reflection of landlords needing to pay more on their mortgage costs, the market demanding, you know, pushing up prices and so on. In terms of the mitigations, as I said, we're doing all we can to work with landlords, try and persuade landlords to keep their tenants, not evict them, find alternative accommodation, find alternative private rented accommodation, increase acquisition. So this year we will have achieved, or on target to achieve, well over 200 purchases of new homes into the council housing social rented stock. But it's insatiable, the demand, sadly, and we're seeing, it's mainly affordability. It's affordability of rent in the marketplace is out of reach for many families, either entering or if they're already in the private rented sector, they're being driven out by increased rent demands from landlords.
Councillor David?
No, I'll leave it there, Chairman. Thank you.
Does any member have a question? Councillor Gerlich.
Thank you, Chair. So there's a significantly high overspend related to the homelessness and the housing, but also the final forecast variance is also high, and it's quite challenging, I suppose, to meet. Would you say that one of the reasons would be delivery of new properties and voids, or anything else?
So within our own council housing stock, actually we're not too bad at managing or turning around empty properties, voids. we tend to be on the higher performing end. What I will pick up though is that there's opportunities to be more creative around the best use of our housing stock, to put it in everyday language. So we offer our tenants downsizing incentives and other incentives to move to smaller properties, to release bigger properties, and all the support we provide. We're investing heavily in the Hayes and Town Centre and Avondale scheme. I mean, quite considerable investment, providing new modern energy efficient warm homes. So we're doing all we can. I think one of the challenges we have got is clearly with any new housing scheme is the lead-in time. And so building up a pipeline of new housing supply from new housing developments and also acquisitions and on our own land is important. The challenge we have is that the wider market is pretty much stagnant, I'm afraid, at the moment. And developers who have flatted developments or flats to develop tend not to commence those blocks unless they're confident to sell all of them. Otherwise they'll be left with lots of empty properties waiting to be sold, which is not good business. So it is about us working with developers to stimulate the wider housing market as well.
Do you have a follow-up, Councillor Koenig?
Thank you, Chair. So I know that in previous years we had increase in homeless applications year on year. Is the same situation now in the last 12 years? Was increase significant to the previous 12 months?
I'm going to allow the question, but I do want questions to try and stick to the budget. We will have things on it, but on this occasion I'll allow it. But can we, if you just try and stick questions to the month 7 position? It's fairly stable. It can be anywhere between 100 to 120 housing inquiries a week, but it's stable but high. Thank you. We are now moving on, I think, into this month 7. Yeah, Councillor Core.
You mentioned that Council is opting to reduce the revenue contribution to capital schemes to maintain the target level of balances. How sustainable do you think it is, and how long can we continue like this? Thank you.
Councillor Cole, would you mind just repeating the question?
And where you're referencing in the report, maybe?
It's on page 21, where we are talking about the HRAs currently forecasting break-even, and this is coming from reduction in capital financing costs, with the Council opting to reduce the revenue contribution to capital schemes. So you're basically reducing revenue contribution to capital schemes to make this level of balance. Do you think this is sustainable?
Can you use your mic? Thank you.
Yes, it is sustainable. I mean, I think the HRA was designed in that way because the capital revenue contributing capital is what we use to finance the capital, and the amounts they involved is not that much in the grand scheme of things. So basically, to maintain our level of reserves, that revenue contributing capital becomes a balancing item. Okay, and the changes aren't that great. So that's how it was designed. The whole thing was designed. So it's sustainable. That was the budget design. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Core, do you have any follow-up?
Yeah, there's a different one which says, we did mention the Waking Watch service, which is to a cost to the Council, but it doesn't tell us if there is a plan to, how do we move out of it, how is it going to be phased out, and do we have deadlines to this? So my only concern with all of this is that had it been more granular with details, it would have been easier to scrutinize. Thank you.
I think the only thing I would say is this is a monetary budget position. This isn't an in-depth report. I think I'd be more than happy to accommodate a report of that nature to understand the specifics in and around the HRA, etc., etc. This is kind of a snapshot of a moment in time. But I will let Dan just briefly address that.
Just on the Waking Watch, that's where the Council stepped in to prevent lots of households living in private accommodation, I should say, needing to leave their homes because of a prohibition order that was likely to be issued by the London Fire Brigade, and by doing so we allowed residents to remain living at home, and it was a cost that we couldn't control, completely unexpectedly placed upon us. But in that particular case, I'm pleased to say that we are about to exit that Waking Watch, subject to final sign-off.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, members, for questions. I'm now going to move on to agenda item 6, which is the budget proposals 26-27. For the third time I've seen him this week, I'm going to invite Steve Muldoon, our new corporate director of finance, to give us an overview of the budget and a little bit, and then Dan Kennedy will speak to how it impacts the resident services portfolio, which he is obviously the corporate director for. So, Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll keep this brief. So on Tuesday night, the overall budget was reviewed by the Resources Committee. So on the YouTube channel for that recording, there is a more detailed background to the overall budget if people wish to go and look at that. So I'll keep this briefer as I did last night. So just to really set the wider financial context that you are inevitably needing to understand to look at the proposals you've been asked to consider this evening. The Council published its medium-term financial strategy for the coming 3 years and the coming 5 years in respect of capital just before Christmas. That was at the Cabinet meeting in December on the 23rd. That strategy reflected a very challenging environment for the Council and for local government generally. That's broadly driven by key factors of rising demand, the market pressures in social care placements and temporary accommodation, as you'd be aware, as well as inflationary cost growth that has regularly outpaced standard inflation and council funding levels. So the government has announced fair funding, and an increase is coming the way of Hillingdon. So it's acknowledging that Hillingdon's been underfunded for a number of years. The benefit, however, of that new funding formula is going to be phased in over 3 years. It will not arrive in full in 26-27. At the same time, the Council's reserves have been significantly depleted over recent times in order to protect Council services, and so that erodes the resilience of the Council, the finances of the Council. The consequence of that is that we now face a situation where growth is required to keep pace with the unavoidable pressures, so that needs to be built into the budget for next year. Obviously, there are necessary tough savings that have been put into the budget, but in order to balance the budget and set a legally balanced budget for next year, the Council is seeking exceptional financial support from government. And just to be clear, for the avoidance of doubt, EFS, as we call it, is not free money. It needs government approval, it needs to be repaid, and it comes at a cost to the Council over the coming years. So as I said, on Tuesday night we went through that overarching budget position in some detail. So in light of that, tonight's meeting is really focused on the proposals of the remit of the committee as set out in the agenda item, and to focus on commentary on the assumptions made therein, the proposed savings and growth that have been put forward, the risks and deliverability of those, and the potential service impacts. In terms of the process that we've taken those proposals through, all across the Council, as well as those in the report for this evening, those savings are owned by senior officers. We don't have any centrally imposed cross-cutting savings which are not specific to individual areas, so each of those are hypothecated to every single directorate and has an owner. They've been through challenge sessions which involved corporate directors, cabinet members and finance. They are realistic rather than aspirational, so reflecting the lessons that we've seen from under-delivery in recent times. But we will continue and need to continue to reflect on those. They are very challenging. Further work is required still to be done on those proposals, and that will include drawing up more detailed delivery plans, in particular those that are recognised and acknowledged to be difficult to deliver, have higher value or higher risk, so that we can then be assured of their delivery next year. And then through the coming year, we will continue to improve on our demand modelling and our savings tracking and monitoring to make sure issues are identified early and addressed early on. So a key output from tonight's discussion is to agree feedback and recommendations to Cabinet, which will then be considered alongside the consultation responses. We have a 6-week consultation currently ongoing. So that will be fed back before the final budget decisions are made in February, and we have meetings scheduled for Cabinet on the 19th of February and then full Council on the 26th of February. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Dan? Turn on your mic.
Thank you. As set out in the paper and sort of following on from Steve, the proposal for within the remit of this Committee for Resident Services is that there is a net budget increase of about 15.8 million, which is a combination of growth of almost 30 million and savings of 14 million. As Steve has set out, with the significant part of that growth is a reflection around the demand pressures from homelessness, but also in other areas to address legacy income targets that will never be achieved, or just pockets of growth pressures which need to be addressed. So, for example, there's a proposal to uplift the budget for tree inspection and maintenance, 430k, and that ensures that we are on top of our statutory duties and continue to do so, particularly as we expand the number of trees in the borough, which is a good thing. The efficiencies and savings proposals set out in the paper the sort of themes of that come from a whole range of different areas, but importantly focus on how we can do things differently. So we touched on that in the previous item. So efficiencies and collaboration and working across services is important. Deploying the use of digital technology as well, enabling self-service, smarter ways and faster ways of working, which cuts out and reduces time, offers the time spent on processes. Doing things the right first time is very much the focus of what we're doing. Importantly as well, collaborative working across services. So joined up service delivery, both within resident services but also across the council, will also yield cost reductions, expenditure reductions as well. So I won't say probably too much more at this point, and just pass back to you, Chair, and invite questions.
Any questions from committee? Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, and thank you once again. I noticed that the budget proposes a 10% increase in discretionary fees and services for the year 26-27. I just wanted to expand on that a little bit and get a bit more information. I just wanted to see, how does that support our continued value for money for residents, and does that still benchmark us as one of the lowest cost boroughs in London post increase? And if you had any data on our neighbouring boroughs to maybe level set that benchmark, that would be useful as well, please.
So, committee, I'm sure, will be aware that in general, the council continues to be a value for money, high quality service provider, and there's some very, very good benchmarking information across adult social care, children's social care and housing services in that regard. In terms of the fees and charges, our fees and charges historically have continued to be very competitively lower placed compared to many other local authorities in London and West London particularly. And there is a whole range of benchmarking available. I mean, just to give you an example, our new waste subscription charge will go up, proposal to go up to £77. That still is considerably lower cost than most other neighbouring boroughs who offer a fortnightly collection. We continue to offer a weekly collection. So it's not just that the cost is lower, the service standards are often much higher as well. And there is Councillor, lots of information that we could make available separately to give assurance to the committee that we continue to offer residents value for money.
Thank you. Councillor Gohill. Nothing else. Councillor Core.
Thank you, Chair. just following up again on what Councillor Gohil said, how do we anticipate people using those services where the fees has been increased by 10%? So what if not enough people take those services up, like we saw in green waste collection? What is the mitigation for that then? Where do we go from there?
So one of the, just picking up on, building on one of the points that Steve raised, is that the proposals that have been put forward have been subject to quite considerable challenge and testing, and so that includes assumptions around levels of income where increased fees and other fees have been applied. So where we are, I suppose, well informed or better informed, we are cautious around the impact that any increase in fees may have on demand. So, in other words, in everyday language, we may reduce our income projections as a result of an assumed reduction in demand where those services are discretionary.
Councillor Cole?
So would that also then mean that we wouldn't have the projected savings that we are expecting and basing our calculations on then?
So where we're confident that the income will be fully achieved, then we've kind of stuck with that in the budget proposals. Where we are perhaps a little more nervous or unsure because it might be a new service, then we will have reduced our income projection. So we're not, in other words, we're expecting to achieve the level of income as set out in the budget.
Steve?
Yeah, I'll just add that corporately we do also maintain a contingency against the potential non-delivery of some of the savings or additional costs. So we have coverage at a corporate level in that regard as well.
Thank you. Councillor Davies.
Thank you. Dan, I'm back to housing again. The budget outlines approximately 8.5 million planned savings. Is this going to be a continuation of what we're doing now, or are we going to excel and speed up what we're doing? Because 8.5 million, we're already in a big situation, and I know majority of it isn't caused by us. So I'm intrigued to see where we go with that.
So we've got a whole range of new initiatives, particularly focused on trying to access more private rented sector accommodation. So we're having lots of conversations at this time with agents and landlords about, look, come on, what will it take to access more private rented accommodation to either prevent homeless households moving into temporary accommodation, or to accelerate the move on from temporary accommodation. And there are a whole range of different initiatives. So some boroughs, for example, offer, in my language, a try before you buy. So we might place them as temporary accommodation placements, and if they're good tenants, then the landlords may then convert them to private rented tenants, which allows us then to completely exit or discharge our duty in terms of homelessness. So we will be trying new and different models of working. Leased accommodation as well, so moving away from nightly or spot purchase temporary accommodation, those 800 units. So we're also looking to approach those agents and landlords to say, come on, if we lock you in for, say, 2 years, well, let's negotiate what that price looks like, a lower price. So all of that will contribute to the 8.5. Some of that 8.5 is also about controlling inflation costs as well. So if the way the modelling's worked is that we've assumed a level of growth, but if we can basically hold that growth, that inflation growth, then actually we bank that towards the 8.5 as well. So I'm not going to pretend it's going to be easy, but we're on the front foot. We're doing the spade work now, and we're proactively working with agents and landlords to win them over and for them to be part of the solution.
Councillor Davies?
Yeah, let's have a follow-up. So a big part of our problem this year was the Chagosians, etc. that come in. Have we been given any sort of advance notice or heads up from the government what we're to expect in the next budget? Because that could potentially, if the government were to go like they have and we end up with another 500 families, that could send us off course. Have we got contingency built for that as well?
So there is no prior notice of those arrivals because they are UK nationals who just self-determined that they're going to travel. As Steve said, we, for unexpected, unforeseen increases in demand or whatever it might be in terms of the pressures on the budget, there is a contingency that has been built in. On that particular cohort, we are lobbying government to provide funding because we are in, not quite unique, but we're just one of a handful of local authorities in the country who experience this pressure as a port authority, and it is a national policy that's led to this position. So really, it's not unreasonable for us to receive new burdens funding to compensate. But so we are pressing hard for that. In respect of, I suppose, that unexpected, unforeseen demand around homelessness, then we will be lobbying, pressing government for fair funding, and that we won't stop on.
Thank you.
Councillor Dott.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question on emergency tree fundings. Looking at the 26-27 budget, there appears to be a very limited provisions for unplanned pressures such as emergency tree maintenance after storms. So could you please explain how this risk is being managed in year and whether a dedicated contingency might provide greater budget stability and avoid pressures later in the year? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Councillor. So if, for example, between now and the end of March, we experience a quite considerable storm and there was lots of tree damage and then we will ensure that necessary works are undertaken. Any pressure on budget wouldn't prevent us from discharging our statutory duties. As Steve has mentioned, that in the budget build for next year there will be a contingency that in the event of unforeseen cost emergencies, then we would have that available to call upon. I'm also pleased to say that the proposal set out an increase in the trees maintenance and inspections budget of £430,000 to step up our programme. And the importance of that of that particular programme is it does mean that inspecting and maintaining trees means that we have healthy trees which are less likely to fall in the event of a storm. Doesn't mean they won't fall, but it just means that there's less likelihood of that happening.
Do you have a follow-up, Councillor Dott?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Do we have any backup plan like 430 if we spend out all the money? Do we have backup to get more money from somewhere else?
The primary sort of budget we would call upon in the case of an overspend would be the contingency, or it would be that I would manage that within my bottom line budget position. So in other words, I would mitigate other costs elsewhere to provide the necessary bottom line budget within year.
Chair, may I just add to that? So the 430 that you see in the table there is the extra that we're adding on to the budget. So there will be a base budget already. This is not the totality of the budget.
Okay. Councillor Gerlich, Councillor Singh, do you have any questions before I come back to Councillor Kaur? Councillor Singh, then Councillor Gerlich.
Thank you, Chair. Just related to the trees, like the council policies, the people they can sponsorship the trees. So how many trees the people they sponsored and how much we gain the money? Any details about that? Thank you.
I would need to come back to the committee with the detail on that.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Gerlich.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could have some clarification around New Year's Green Lane civic amenities, because we have in Table 2 there is the savings of 70,000 that the sites contributes, but in Table 3 we've got two growth allocations, one of 165 and another one of 70. Could someone clarify or explain how we've got two growth contributions and then there's the same sort of contribution of savings of 70?
I'll give officers a moment just to find their on the paper. I think it's pages 28 and 29. Sometimes the paper and the online numbers are different. Yeah.
So just in terms of the 70 that you see, it's effectively two mitigating items. They are separate, so one is a saving, but then that's offset by additional software costs that are required to be incurred in order to deliver that saving. And then the 165 is a separate item relating to pressures against savings that are being carried forward from the current financial year that will not be delivered in next year.
Councillor Garlick? Your mic, don't forget your mic. Don't forget your mic. It's okay.
Another question relating to waste collection efficiencies. So it will be table 2 again. That's quite a large annual saving. And could you tell me how is it achieved? Is it cost reduction, improvements?
Yep. So I'm undertaking a review of waste services at this current time. So one of our sort of wider strategy points is how we can prevent waste, and the waste that we do receive, we channel that into lower cost waste streams. So again, in everyday language, we need to move away from landfill or residual waste streams, which cost us a lot of money, and move waste into lower cost streams. So for example, one of the initiatives that we are actively promoting is called simpler recycling. So importantly, that segregates waste from landfill or residual waste, food waste, and gets it into a lower cost food stream. So we've reflected the savings in there about how we can both deliver reductions in waste and the unit cost of waste disposal, as well as improving the efficiency of the operations over the term of the MTFS.
Would an example of that be the rollout of food caddies into flats? I think we've got something between 20 and 25,000 flats in the borough that currently aren't. And actually I was reading some mind-boggling statistics that told me that the amount of money that a council can save by simply people recycling their food waste, not in with the black sacks, is quite remarkable in the amount. So is that an example of ways we might be able to save money?
So we're just about to launch a programme to move 20,000 households in flatted developments, flats, onto a food waste recycling programme, so that it doesn't end up in landfill. And that is a considerable cost reduction to the council.
Councillor Bennett will be over the moon. Councillor Corr.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to now understand how confident you are that these planned money-saving ideas will actually happen this year in terms of percentage. What percentage do you think will definitely happen, and what are likely to not happen? Have you worked out in terms of success?
Dan, I think that's a good question, and I'd also, if I could add to that, Councillor Corr, I'd be really interested, because I think it's been important in the last select committees about some of the work that's been put in place for cost control measures, as in like the new ways that council officers are interacting with each other to make sure that cost is actually there, so that these things can be achieved, because I think the two come together, if that's permissible. Thank you.
It's an excellent question. I mean, I'm going to sort of refer to what my colleague on my left said earlier, is that all the proposals that have been prepared and presented to Cabinet have been subject to considerable scrutiny. The intention is that all savings efficiencies will be delivered. If there is something that's outside the control of the council, then as corporate director, I will do everything within my power to manage that pressure within my own budget. by applying, as the Chair has just said, cost control measures, additional mitigations, and so on, to ensure that the bottom line position remains as expected and on target.
Yeah, thank you. So, as I said in my introduction, we've taken all of these savings through significant process of review internally to assess that these are realistic savings to expect to achieve next year. There's been quite a lot of discussion, and we've reviewed and pushed back on some of those savings in that process. As has already been explained, we've also introduced, spend control measures, which mean that any new spend needs to come through myself for approval before it goes ahead. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we have a contingency as a backstop as well.
Councillor Cole.
Thank you. And we did mention that obviously the consultation is on as well, where people are going to respond to the questions that have been asked of them. From my previous experience, we haven't stuck to the consultation results. So if majority of people are against something, we've still gone ahead and done that. How are we making sure that resident consultation is actually being listened to? Because this is what we've seen in the last few years that has happened, that when every time we go for a budget consultation, something comes up and then it's difficult for us to stick to the results of the consultation. Thank you.
Councillor Cole, I think what I would say on that particular agenda item is, whilst I hear you and resident consultations are incredibly important, they're not referendums on outcomes, and we'll have a really important thing that happens in May, which will be an election where we'll all enjoy that. And I think it's probably not for officers. It's ultimately the decision-making cabinet that makes the ultimate decisions on what's in and out of the budget. So that might be a question potentially for full council to a cabinet member or relevant. I don't particularly think if it's okay with you, particularly an officer for things. I think that's sort of like us as elected officials through elections, through other things that can do it. But your point will certainly have been heard by the committee and will be minuted, so it's on the record. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gohill.
Thanks, Chair. So, Steve, earlier in this meeting you said that, you quite rightly said that EFS isn't free money, it comes with conditions. But I don't think we've unpacked everything within this budget as well. And the particular area that I don't think we've unpacked fully is fair funding either. Is it also fair to say fair funding isn't free money? Because as far as I understand it, yes, it's coming over a 3-year period, but it also, am I correct in my understanding that it predicates a full increase in council tax up to the referendum limit over that period of time? Otherwise, the amount that's given through fair funding is reduced. Am I wrong in thinking that? And also, are there not other conditions and delivery expectations that come with those? And it's not simply unrestricted additional government funding. If you could perhaps clarify on that, that would be quite useful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, yes, the amount that was announced was predicated on all councils up and down the country applying a 4.99% increase in each of the 3 years. That's something that council taxpayers obviously pay. It's not coming from government, so it in itself is not government funded in that way that we see through other means. Also, it makes assumptions around business rates and the collectability of those business rates, and whether those business rates, which are seeing a significant increase going forward, that there's no appeals against those business rates, and we see that there is a risk in that regard. We covered that on Tuesday night at the other committee. And in terms of EFS, you're right, it's not free money. It's the ability to borrow. It's a bit like borrowing to pay for your everyday revenue, and that we would then need to repay that borrowing over the following 20 years. And if we borrow from the PWLB, the Public Works Loan Board, we would then be paying interest on that borrowing as well.
Thank you. Councillor Gohill.
Thank you. It doesn't seem like the fair funding's that fair when you look at it that way. I do have a separate question on major capital projects. if I may. The report quite outrightly mentioned that we're still investing in community assets like the Hillingdon water sports facility and the crematorium refurb as well. I was just wondering if you could expand on the investment within those and what you expect, what outcomes you expect as a result of that investment. Are we looking to generate a sustainable income from after that investment? Will we see new users attracted to site, better capacities, etc., that kind of thing?
You'll see clearly, quite rightly, Councillor Hill, that the budget plan includes a capital programme building on our existing programmes, which includes, obviously beyond the remit of this committee, but includes quite an ambitious continued schools programme. Obviously the new Jubilee Leisure Centre, which we're really excited about, which will be opening very soon, which is absolutely incredible for this borough. As well as in the housing revenue account, new housing supply, quite considerable sums of money, as well as within the housing revenue account, considerable expenditure to improve our homes to achieve our decent homes target, which we're on track with, and the regulator is very pleased with. So in terms of the new water sports facility, that's a replacement for the current HOAC. It's going to be a lovely modern facility offering residents new experiences and water activities. In terms of our, I suppose our kind of position is that clearly where it's feasible, we want income to meet the cost of running those services, and or we secure grant funding or other measures, opportunities to operate those facilities which deliver our residents good value and the income necessary. In terms of the crematorium, that's very much about maintaining the service to residents, but also it will introduce efficiencies in the running of those services as well. So in many respects, both necessary projects and promises which we've given to residents to deliver.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a final question, and then I think we'll move on, if that's okay. Mine's just around financial resilience. The budget strategy retains, I was pleased to see there's a 10 million contingency and builds a realistic assumption into the base budget. Could officers share how this contingency will be used to absorb the unplanned pressures specific to resident services, community safety, environmental responses, emergency works on roads and pavements, and what mechanisms are in place to review spending performance through the year?
Thank you. I think the first port of call is not that, we've got an underspend, can we have some contingency? There will be an expectation that corporate directors and their heads of service will be managing their service and looking for those mitigations, as has been asked about earlier this evening. So that is the first port of call. It's not just about that service, it's also managing it across the wider piece, in the wider directorate, and then across the council as well. So I do like to say that the budget is not a target to spend necessarily, it's a limit, and that's what we should be trying to stick to. And so if we have got underspends, rather than spend the rest of the budget as well, then we should be seeking to bank that underspend, because that can act as a mitigation towards potential overspends and under-delivery on savings, for example. So that really is kind of the first approach to that. We're hoping that with the newly introduced spend control measures that we have in place, that shouldn't be just a mechanism to capture and stop spends as they come through on request forms. It should also act as a deterrent and therefore change the culture somewhat in terms of encouraging officers to consider and reflect first of all as to whether that expenditure needs to take place. And so that should in itself lead to some element of underspend on overheads and expenditure lines as well.
Thank you. Councillor Kaur has indicated, and as it's my first meeting, I'm feeling generous. Councillor Kaur.
You're very kind, Chair. One last one. At what point do we know that these efficiencies are not working and are cutting on our services, is there a benchmark? For example, there is this savings that are coming out of our nuisance service review or similar savings. At what point do we decide that these efficiencies are not working and our frontline services are being affected? How do we measure that? Thank you.
I'm happy to pick that one up, Chair. So, I mean, as part of as Steve's mentioned, as part of the detailed planning for all of the services, we undertake a very detailed appraisal, both of the ability to deliver any cost reductions, any savings, efficiencies, as well as an impact assessment as a result of proposals as well. So in terms of whether or not we feel that a proposal will be delivered, will fly, we'll know that before we even have got to really any stage of implementation. But should we come across anything that's unforeseen during the period of implementation, then we will naturally review the position, and if we can mitigate any risk, then we will do so. If not, we will go back to members and say, look, we've found something, we didn't expect it. Here are some options. What would you like us to do? So we'll always keep residents, or put residents first in everything we do.
Can I thank the committee for that excellent line of questioning? Can I thank Steve and his team for the incredible amount of hard work that I know we've gone into putting this budget together? I'm sure I can, on behalf of the entire committee, thank the officers for the diligent way that they have done it under some testing circumstances, but certainly I feel like we have got some really stringent cost control measures in place, and as I like to say, there's no such thing as council money, just council taxpayers' money, and if we remind ourselves of that every day of the week, we will remind ourselves to spend it in a more efficient and better way. If officers who would like to leave, we will, with comments, we need to delegate comments, or give comments to the Cabinet, so comments are going to be delegated to the Democratic Services Officer in conjunction with myself as the Chair and in consultation with the Opposition Lead, as has been the tradition on this committee. Okay, thank you all very much for your time. Okay, we'll now move on to agenda item 7. I am conscious that we have guests here. So this is the performance report. I'm going to take this as read, if that's all right, Dan. Does anybody have any questions on agenda item 7? Councillor Darren Davies.
Thank you, Chairman. I have lots of questions. First, I just want to go back to a question I've asked when ABCO had previously been here. Or when we
Councillor Davies, we're on the performance report.
Sorry. I got all excited there.
I know.
Let's leave that for a minute. I'll come back to it.
We're going to bottle Councillor Davies' excitement. Councillor Gohill.
Thanks, Chair. In the performance report, there's actually quite a lot of good news in here. You know, we've got the fourth lowest net expenditure in London per 100,000 residents. We've got, you know, we've got our housing landlord services continues to perform strongly, etc. So I think generally as a comment, I wanted to make there's actually quite a lot of good news in here. But I do have a question as well, if you will. And it was just on page 10, it wasn't page 10, sorry. But within the report, it references 245 new council homes are delivered. But that number, I believe, is a gross number and doesn't take into account right to buy. And the amount of homes that we lose through that. And so I was just wondering if we can get a bit more of an accurate position that we're in when we take into account the right to buy losses.
Dan?
We can certainly do that. I mean, in past years, typically we've seen about 50 right to buy properties. So again, it could be a little bit higher because we had that sort of spike in applications when government removed or significantly reduced, I should say, the discount available for tenants. But we can come back with an accurate position.
Councillor Gohill?
I do have a follow-up on I have a separate question actually, rather than follow-up, and that's just on recycling contamination. The contamination levels they haven't really been sort of quantified yet, and I don't quite know how much of our waste and recycling is then being contaminated. I'm hoping we can get a bit more in-depth detail and data on that, just so we know where the pitfalls are, so to say.
Yeah, absolutely, we can do that. Chair, probably useful, I think it's at our next session on waste, our next committee, when I think we can more fully perhaps delve into that, if that's okay.
Can we make a note of that, Liz? And I think that can be one of the discussion points we can have in that in-depth session we're going to do on waste. Councillor Core. Thank you, Councillor Gohill. Councillor Core.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just struggling to understand that 1/3 of council homes in Hillingdon have failed decent home standards, and this is worst among the the people we can compare with, the boroughs we can compare with. While we also claim that we are best in class repair in terms of speed, how do we reconcile this? So we don't meet decent home standards, but we are best in terms of repairs. How does that work?
So the decent home standard is about homes which meet a required standard around kitchens, bathrooms, windows, energy efficiency, and so on. And in terms of repairs, it's about the tenant experience, our speed of response, the right first time or fix it first time, so that we don't have to come back and repeat repairs and so on. So generally speaking, feedback from tenants or satisfaction from tenants is high with our services when we benchmark with other social housing landlords. I would say on the decent homes position, the roughly 30%, that was a 1st of April or 31st of March, I should say, 2024 position. We've made considerable progress since then, and Cabinet have approved in the budget previously £108 million to improve our homes. We are on track to be approximately 14%, 15% by the end of March non-decent, and our plan is speeding us to be achieve over the next 2 to 3 years 5% non-decent, which the regulator has indicated informally to us that they're happy with the plans and the progress to date. Myself and senior officers, along with Councillor Bianco and Councillor Tuckwell, met with the regulator last month, and they expressed no concern about our progress and our trajectory.
Councillor Core?
Thank you. It's a different question. Last time, in last presentation, we heard about 40 families had presented at Heathrow. I think Chagosian families or some families you did mention. And this, now we see that Heathrow is what is causing the rough sleeping as well, isn't it? The evictions from that's also causing rough sleeping. So do we know how many rough sleepers do we get from Heathrow, and how many families presented within this term? Do we know that?
Yes, we do. We've got details. I mean, I can provide that through the chair.
That would be great. I think we could also have that as part of the agenda item we got in February on homeless and rough sleeping strategy. I think that would be good for that to come then.
Great suggestion.
Thank you. Good question, Councillor Core. Thank you. I can't see any other members in... Oh, go on, Councillor Davies. Remember, this isn't APCOA.
Yeah, I won't have any questions for that item. Let me just find it. I'm interested in the chart that we've got on, what page is this? It doesn't have a page number on it, but it's 52 on the digital one. So it's about vacant dwellings. Reading that report, it says vacant dwellings become available. Normally, we have people in a vacant property within 32 days or 30 days. I believe it was. I'm just trying to find it. Average relet time, sorry, is 30.64 days, which is 14 days faster. But then if we carry on further down, it says that we're behind, remains 14% below the England average. Can you just explain how that works? Because 30 days for a vacant property does seem quite a long time.
It can seem like a long time, and we're always pressing to try to reduce that further. So what we have to undertake is a whole range of checks, health and safety checks, gas checks, asbestos checks. Sometimes we have to take quite considerable repairs to properties before we can re-let them. Sometimes we take the opportunity to e.g. replace a boiler or whatever it might be. So it's an average across all of our properties. I think the key thing is, as we increase the decency of our properties, the likelihood for any major works before we relet will reduce. So in other words, we'll speed up our relet time over time.
Thank you, Dan. Yep, quick one because I want to move on. You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, committee, for that. We have two recommendations here: to note the 6-month report for 2025 as attached in Appendix 1, and then to make any comments which will be presented to full council in January alongside the 6-month performance report for information. Comments will be delegated to the Democratic Services Officer in conjunction with the Chair and in consultation with the Opposition Lead. We all happy with that? Thank you very much, committee. We now move on to agenda item 8, which is parking enforcement, and I'd like to play a warm welcome to our friends from APCO, Kenny and Keda, who have joined us this evening. Thank you very much. I understand from my colleagues in Bromley you've done something, maybe not you, but APCO have done something similar with them on a committee similar to this, so it's great to have you here. I'm going to ask Richard Webb to introduce the item, and then I know our friends from APCO are going to say a few words, and then we'll open up to questions from the committee. So, Richard, it's great to have you back, but over to you.
Many thanks, Chair. So I hope the report that you've got provides some general background to our parking enforcement approach and some of the key data. It's a data-rich area, so except there's probably quite a lot of information you might want. We might have to provide for you afterwards, but we provided a snapshot in the paper. Our parking enforcement approach is very much based around our partnership with APCOA. The contract for the parking enforcement commenced in 2022, actually ends next year, but there are options to extend that contract within the existing contract. And the contract scope, as outlined by the paper, includes provision of civil enforcement officers, or parking wardens in other language, as well as parking and moving traffic enforcement cameras and some ancillary services, such as cash collection. The civil enforcement officers are deployed both to cover our car parks and ensure payments made for parking in our car parks, and our on-street parking bays, as well as parking restrictions such as double yellow lines, and including all of our permit zones. So there's quite a wide range of work they undertake. The contract includes a whole range of key performance indicators, particular focus being around deployment levels, and the contracted hours of service we expect APCOA to provide, and keeping those within specified bands, and error rates for issues of PCNs. Errors do happen, and there's obviously a maximum amount of errors or percentage of errors in the contract, as well as other factors such as response times to our enforcement line that residents can use. Our parking team meet with APCOA and talk with APCOA almost on a daily basis, on an operational ad hoc basis, meet with them monthly to go through performance information, issues arising, and to review a whole range of matters such as deployments, and we also undertake formal annual reviews with APCOA. The deployments, as I've mentioned, are agreed jointly. There's a whole range of information that goes into how we decide what is the most appropriate deployment of our civil enforcement officers, including things like priorities around school pick-up and collection times, areas of higher non-compliance, and there's a rich data set around where the areas show highest non-compliance, resident and elected member feedback as to their aspirations and what they would like. Particular challenge for us in the borough, of course, is that it's a diverse and large borough, so we have a lot of large open areas, both to deploy CEOs to get to and then for them to patrol. So one of our ways of tackling that issue has been the recent lease of an automatic number plate recognition camera equipped car, which we're now starting to deploy, and we will be evaluating that to see how that means we can more efficiently cover large areas and pick up resident priorities. And as a result of that, we're now actively reviewing our deployment model so we can look at redeploying CEOs to areas where we know there is the greatest need. So I'll hand over to Kenny for a few words before questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the very kind invitation, the very, very warm welcome from particularly certain members of the committee. It's A real pleasure to be here. ABCOA have had a long-standing relationship with the borough. In fact, our head office is within Uxbridge, and our European head office has literally just moved in the last quarter of last year. So we are very much committed to Hillingdon as a borough and Uxbridge. If you look more widely within Hillingdon, we have Heathrow, which is one of our major contracts as well. I think within the borough we employ over 500 people. To talk about what we are here to talk about today, which is the parking enforcement contract, we employ around 60 people on that. We are a very flexible employer within that allows us to employ between 20 and 30% of our team within the borough, and a similar percentage that is flexible working. So we work really hard to help our teams to deliver. We know that our teams have an incredibly challenging job. We've all heard traffic warden jokes. Our civil enforcement officers are out in all sorts of weather and are very often lone working and have difficult challenges, and despite the fact that they are doing a public service, their service is not often welcome unless you happen to be the person that car is in the way of. So we do work very hard to help them with the abuse that they face. We've worked very well with the local sergeant within Uxbridge Town Centre, who's been particularly helpful to us in helping us devise different ways in which they can help themselves initially, because that is the quickest way to help themselves, and also how we can prosecute, and we've been successful in prosecuting a number of cases, I think 2 in the last year, where there's been assaults. They also sustained just small level, including once in the lift in this very building from a builder, which was reported when I was there, of just small, often quite malicious. So I would appreciate the committee taking the time to appreciate the job that those frontline team do. With Richard and his team, we work incredibly hard to make sure that the service that we deliver is a cost-effective service and an efficient service to the borough and to residents. We are taking the opportunity of the new ANPR car that was mentioned to really look at how we deliver that service, to make sure that we are delivering for residents, but also having a really agile service and a service that allows us to be data-led, so that we're going to the areas of high NOR compliance. And that's not new, but the introduction of this car helps us to do that, and you'll see over the course of the years one of the indications of success that we're sending people to the right place is PCN numbers. It is absolutely not something that we can target or ensure, but it is one of the indications that we are going to the right places with our team, and those have increased year on year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard and Kenny. Councillor Davies, as you were so excited earlier, I'll start with you.
I don't have any questions, Chairman. I only joking. Thank you very much. And I was privileged with some of the other members of this committee to go out and do a frontline visit. So I've seen firsthand how the parking officers are dealt with and how they handle their job. So which leads me quite nicely into my first question. Do we now have ABCOA in our CCTV control room, or do we have a radio in our control room to link in when there's a code red? So I can see from this that there is definitely an under-identified number of code reds. And last time we were here, we had a discussion about putting ABCOA into our CCTV control room, or having a radio linked to the control room. If a code red come in, we could activate cameras if we had them in the area and make sure that them COs were safe. Have we looked into this? If so, why not?
Richard or Dan?
So no, ABCOA are not based in our CCTV control room. There is obviously an intention to make sure that the ABCOA operative can activate and contact the CCTV control room if they need to, but they're not based in the control room. They are still separate. I don't believe that. I think that because the control room is a secure environment, supervised access, and it's not 24/7 staffed, a permanent redeployment of the office where the current APCOA, I don't know the exact term, but the person who's on the end of the radio for the CEOs into the control room is not currently considered a viable option.
Councillor Davies, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, I just want to come back on that. I understand that financially and maybe operationally it's not viable to have a person in there, but a radio link into that control room doesn't seem too unfair or unreasonable, because yes, the person who puts in a code red won't be talking directly to the control room, but that control room would be able to hear and activate any cameras to ensure that the CEO is safe, because myself and Councillor Core witnessed firsthand a code red incident when a CEO put a call in for they were in distress, and they actually got a phone call back, do you need the police? By this time the PDA had been taken out of the CEO's hand. We were there as bystanders, and trust me, it took every ounce not to get involved. And I just think for something very small and minuscule as such as a radio in that control room could potentially save injury to a CEO.
Richard?
So when we looked at this before, the challenge was that if a code red goes into the APCO control room, they're dealing with that, engaging with the CEO, talking with them actively, possibly needing to contact the police as well if required. Similarly, our control CCTV control room staff, they have other inputs, phone and police inputs. So the ability for those officers to always be available to prioritise that communication between the two, we don't want that to distract from the support provided to the CEO by the officer in APCO's control room. You may have more insight.
I think it is a very difficult, and I know about the situation you're talking about, because every time an officer has a code red, one of the good things about Hillingdon is that our officers have their body-worn cameras on at all times. Often in other boroughs that's something that's more contentious, and our team have them on at all times. When an officer presses a code red button, they should not be met with the response of someone calling them. They should be asked if they need the police, because often pressing that red button, and I watch every code red body-worn camera and everything that is anywhere close to it, quite often just pressing that button means that the member of the public moves away. The other thing is that we've worked with the police on really trying to educate the officers about moving away, because often it's human instinct for them to stay in position, and they can be more at risk by staying in position. And they think, if we're calling the police, I've got to stay and wait for the police, and often that is within the vicinity of the person who's tried to assault them. So we've worked very hard in the last year and a half to try to educate the CEOs to move away from that in different ways in which to help their own personal safety, and also training on the control room staff that we have in order to make sure that they have the right reaction. And it's a very difficult one. Whenever you're hit with an emergency situation, we all know ourselves, we react in different ways, and it's very difficult when you're on the end of a radio, and I'm very often in the office next door and hear it and go. And one of the things that I would support Richard on is that sometimes many people trying to get involved, trying to get involved there, on top of the radio controller or in KDAR, and everyone else can cause that challenge as well.
Thank you. Councillor Dott.
Just to follow up with the Councillor Davis' question about code red, are the CEOs equipped with any people safe device, or like you said, when they press the red button, can you connect with the CEOs through the GPS, or what technology you use?
Yeah, so we have a number of ways in which we can do that. First of all, if they click the red button, their mic goes live, and it makes a noise, an alarm noise, which often does defer any further issues. It also means that any nearby CEOs will know where they are. If there is a really serious incident, then as they press that button, an email gets sent directly to our control room with their location. We also, within all our handheld devices, have the location, and that's up on a screen within our control room as well. So if the worst happened and someone wasn't able to tell us where they were, we're able to send the police and emergency services straight to them as well.
Councillor, do you have a follow-up?
No.
Councillor Core.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed there are 420 verbal abuse incidents and 31 code red incidents, and it says that it is still underreported. Has it got anything to do with the fact that majority of your employees are from diverse backgrounds, especially BAME backgrounds? And I also want to understand, how are you checking this underreporting? How are you making sure that there is enough room for whistleblowing if there needs to be? How safe it is for them to report, how confident they are reporting? And also in this current charged atmosphere where not only by the virtue of their role, but also the color of skin can play a part where they can be verbally abused. So how are you looking into that and making sure it doesn't happen to your CEOs? Thank you.
So we work incredibly hard to encourage CEOs, and I think if you spoke to the CEOs, the thing that they would tell you that I speak to them about the most is their personal safety, and trying to report. We call them code blues. Those are the small, but can be very impactful abuse, and yes, very often they are racist. So we work with, and it's very difficult for us to stop them because it's generally someone walking down the street who will do that, and it's very difficult for APCOA to stop that. And I'll be very honest in what I tell my team is, if they report these, we can use that data to go to the police and ask for assistance in those particular areas. It's also a way for us to understand when we can dual deploy, and as I know when you were out with my officers, sometimes being dual deployed, sometimes I think there was a total of 6 people or something in total when that incident happened. It doesn't negate the fact that it can happen. It can happen whether you're by yourself or in a group. We do prioritise dual deployment in particular areas. We do encourage that. We do have a safe call line, which means that if any of our employees feel that they can't come to the management team in particular, then they can go. I would hope that we've built a relationship up with the team that they can come, because we encourage them to do so. It's not something that we try to take down at all. We are generally the ones, I'm generally standing in front of them going, I know that 30 were reported last month. Actually, I am sure 30 happened in a day. Often, that's possibly an exaggeration, but that is how I try to speak to them about it too, and then we can pinpoint the areas and ask for police assistance in those areas.
Follow up, Councillor Cole.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And do you know when they're reported, do you then log it as a hate crime or racist crime, and then you take it on with the police? Do you do that? Thank you.
So we encourage the team to do so. What I have done along with the Uxbridge Police Sergeant is create an online template on how to do an online, because very often people the CEOs don't want to report crime, and they think, oh, it's not worth it, that's just life. And we very, very much encourage them not to be like that. We also try to encourage them, we try to encourage them online. We've also, the police sergeant has come in a number of occasions to speak to the team, because there's a lot of myths build up, and it's all very well for me to tell them that, but they think that if they go towards a prosecution, they won't be allowed to go on holiday, they won't be allowed to leave the country, which especially if you have family in other parts of the world, that is a particular challenge for those CEOs. So we try to dismiss those, and actually if you looked across different boroughs, we've had more success than most in actually prosecuting those, but it is a challenge that I am open to more ideas on.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Councillor Gohill.
Thank you.
Could you use your microphone?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned dual deployers, and I think it is important to have them in high-risk areas. But and this isn't based on what I've read in the report, just based on what I've seen eye to eye, kind of across the borough, north to south. More often than not, whenever I see some CEOs out and about, it's often in groups of about 4, roughly. Sometimes more. I've seen up to 6. And you know, I don't really think it's the best use of anyone's time or money for 4 people to be looking at the same strip of cars. And these are in kind of high footfall areas, and I was just wondering if that's a common occurrence, or given by the raised eyebrows, I guess you're going to say no, it's not a common occurrence. But what are we doing to make sure that that they're kind of, other than in kind of red areas or red zone areas, that they are actually kind of spread out?
So one of the challenges that we have is that these CEOs are remote workers. There is often, I can list many reasons, and they're listed in the report, as to why people may be together. Part of it may indeed be that what we often do is drop CEOs in the mornings or at lunchtimes and things to do it. I am not going to pretend to you that I don't believe that there's not more work to be done in terms of ensuring that CEOs go to the right places at the right times. It's one of the things that we work very hard on. The CEOs are all very aware that in the office downstairs, our control room, that we can see where each of them are, so you can see when they're grouped together. The council officers have access to that as well and can look live at where our CEOs are. And we've looked to understand why they are together. At times, it is human instinct to come together, and it is our job as their management team to make sure that they're going off. Part of that is by looking at their performance. We do lots of performance reviews on their team. We can use the system that maps where they are to see where they've been for the day, and look at how effective they have been. Well, we can't specifically target them on what often is asked of us, which is PCN numbers. We can look at whether particular CEOs are being effective, particular areas are being effective, and we have made inroads in that as well. I'll never pretend that the service is perfect, but we work very hard on that. And if you see that, please report to the council officers and we'll look at it.
Councillor Singh. Oh, sorry, Councillor Gohill. Apologies, Councillor Gohill.
Sorry, and thank you for allowing me a follow-up. Just before I ask a follow-up, it might be, I know the radios that they have are kind of GPS tracked. It might be worth having a look every once in a while and seeing if there's multiple dots in one spot rather than all over the place. So, but yeah, we do and we'll let officers know. I have a separate question, which is kind of around how our parking enforcement hotline data is aligned with APCOA, and I wondered, this might be one for you, Richard, it might be one for you guys in conjunction to answer, but is our parking enforcement hotline, is that logged in at a road level? And then a question to APCOA on whether that data over a period of time, is that used to kind of create hotspots or identify kind of repeat problem areas, so you know that's where to continuously send COs to deal with it?
So APCOA operate the parking enforcement line, so it goes into a member of my team, and what we do is we do compile particular areas. We also try to educate members of the public who parking enforcement, it can be a challenging thing to understand, and just because a car is parked as a nuisance doesn't necessarily mean, I've had that situation myself locally near my home. It doesn't necessarily mean it's parked. So the first thing is to try and make sure that we're sending people to the right places. But yes, when there's consistent areas of problems, we do try to start to be proactive and log those. We also work in conjunction with the complaints that the council officers get separately to understand where to go, and through yourselves as well, to understand where to go and build a picture of that. And we record, so every time we go to somewhere, we record whether we've moved on a car, whether we've issued a PCN, so that we can understand the effectiveness of that visit.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, officers. Can I ask about the CCTV vehicles, more detail for that? What's the benefit and safety for the CEO, and connect with the control room? Could you provide the more details? And what is the future plan?
The CCTV car operates an ANP, well, it operates in two ways within the borough. It operates as the ability to scan. It's not CCTV in that it is looking at members of the public as it goes along. What it does is it scans number plates. So particularly in a borough like Hillingdon, which is the largest in West London, second largest in London, I believe, it allows us to go through those large permit zones in a much more efficient way because someone on foot can never do that. And so being in a car is naturally a safer, and to answer your question, it's naturally safer to be in a car rather than out on foot. The legislation does mean that in order to issue a PCN, we cannot issue for a permit car park, someone parked in contravention in a permit zone without getting out of the car, so they do need to get out. There does need to be an observation period. So it is not a magic solution that is going, but it does help us be far more efficient getting round and then redeploy those resources into the areas of high non-compliance, like the town centres, where a foot CEO is going to be much more efficient as well, and a deterrent to non-compliance.
Councillor Singh, do you have a follow-up? Okay, Councillor Dott. Councillor Dott, my apologies, could you use your mic?
In my ward, there are areas where people continuously reporting the illegal parking or footway parking, which highlighted many times to the council, like where the resident or parents come to drop their children and they block the people's driveways and on footway parking, and residents who live there, they actually struggling. What actions are being taken to address repeated footway parking where near the schools, especially where the safety risks are higher? Thank you.
I mean, we dedicate a lot of resource to going to schools each day. I don't have the number to hand, but it's in the report on how many school visits we do. We visit in the mornings and the evenings. It is a very challenging environment. Some parents welcome us, often others really don't. We also have to be mindful of the legislation in that quite often we have to give a member of the public time to move on. It is a real challenge. I'm happy. I work with Richard's officers very often on which schools we prioritise and go to, and I'm happy to visit particular schools that have been identified myself to look at different ways in which we can approach it.
Councillor Dott, can I suggest you put in a member's inquiry and if there's any specifics that you've got, and I'm sure Richard will follow that up and we'll follow up with
it. Chair, but the question was the borough-wide,
Yeah, but I think it'd be good. I think it's an important one, and the members' inquiry system should be able to support you, and please let the cabinet member know if that's not followed up. Richard.
Actually, I was going to say something similar. Often it is the case that there's continuing enforcement efforts where we may not pick up that actually we need to do something different in an area. We need to have a look, as you say, talk to a school, have a look at what is going on in that area rather than just deploying enforcement resources. So please do raise specific locations, and if we haven't looked at them before, we'll look at them again.
Councillor Gerlich.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around the three CEOs who are quality monitors. I wanted to know where are they currently deployed? Also, how long have you been sort of using those cameras in Hillingdon? And how is the data collected on how is it used after it's been collected?
So it was something that we put in as a value add into our contract at the beginning of the contract. So they deploy daily. They deploy to different beats, and that gets fed into a system that we've given the council access to. It's a digital system that automatically uploads each evening. The council officers would need to explain what is used, what that data is used for.
Richard, do you want to cover what the data is used for?
I might have to take that away, actually. It's not something that comes into my area, so I'd need to go away and make some inquiries as to where that data is fed into.
If you could do that and feed it back to Liz, who could feed it back to the committee.
So I think would be useful to know how this data is used, and are we, it's helping us to, because there are some high traffic areas, but there are probably other areas in Hillingdon where the sort of quality is changing. So if we could have, find out how those statistics are used.
We'll take that away and ask that to be emailed to the committee. I'm going to just cover a couple of points. How does, looking at some of the tables around required hours, PCNs issued, how does that measure up against other London boroughs that you work with? And is there other services in terms of the wider enforcement sort of portfolio that you work with on London boroughs you had of success? That's probably a fairly nice, easy one to start with. I also have a question around the monitoring and the training of enforcement officers. So I have a resident who read on Facebook, they were being incredibly helpful actually, they read on Facebook about the amount of time you have to go and get a parking ticket, either on a road or in a parking car park, council car park. And they didn't put this all over Facebook, which somebody did, but somebody didn't put this is, they went and asked multiple enforcement officers. They unfortunately didn't take all of their details, but they got like 3 or 4 different answers, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I had to ask the cabinet member in the end directly, which very rarely I would go direct to a cabinet member on an issue, but given there was quite a lot of confusion and I had to put clarification out on Facebook, so I just wanted to understand a little bit around the services, first of all the services you offer and but also around how you do training and sort of performance management to ensure that people are kept up to date.
In terms of initial training, the team go through an online training course. They do that in-house here in the Civic Centre so that we can check in on them daily and they can ask questions of the experienced team. They then have to sit an exam that is regulated by the British Parking Association in order to go through, and we're very strict on those pass rates. In terms of once they are then qualified through that online training, they go on to do a day with one of the operations support managers within my team who goes through the local things, because very often there are specifics to each borough in terms of what is prioritised, what observation times there are, and other kind of local issues. They then get paired up with an experienced senior CEO for a minimum of 2 weeks, and then they have to be signed off by that senior and then by one of the operations support managers. To tackle the question around the different times that you could take to get a PCN, it is dependent on what the contravention is. So sometimes it can be instant. If you're on a skills zigzag, for example, it is instant. If you are in a permit bay, it is 5 minutes in this borough. It is as low as 0 in other boroughs. So that is the...
If I may, I think one of my concerns is that the civil enforcement officers are sometimes saying 5 minutes, one of them saying 5 minutes, another one saying 3 minutes, another one saying 10 minutes, like I've had, just based on bays in the high street, I've had them come back with 3 different answers.
Okay. They shouldn't be coming back with different answers is the answer to your question. We can do some random testing on the officers to ensure moving forward that's the case, which the team do continual training on. In terms of the actual ongoing performance monitoring of the officers, once they're through their probation, we monitor their performance on a daily basis. We share a report that is down to individual officer level with council officers each day, and we analyse that, as do the council officers. We do that weekly, monthly. We sit down with our underperforming CEOs weekly, with our performing CEOs monthly, and with our underperforming CEOs, we would send either an experienced officer or a manager out with them again. We also will then, once we've done that and we're confident that they know the policies and procedures, again, we will then look at their performance over the next week or two, and then we have a system called GeoSmarty, which allows us to track where they've been, and we can look at whether they've been in the right place. It allows us to see where they've logged cars, where they've issued PCNs, and we do that regularly with our underperforming CEOs.
Just another couple of very short ones from me. The enforcement of motorcycles. As chair, you shouldn't do a ward issue, but it blights not my high street in Ruislip, but I also know it blights others. We obviously, as councillors, have worked very hard to get the only 2 motorcycling bays. It does sometimes feel like our civil enforcement officers and the delivery drivers are all very pally, and that there isn't much enforcement going on. Is there anything we can do with driver aids? Is there anything we can do to really improve that? That's question 1. The second is consistency, and from what I'm hearing, I worry whether this is an APCOA council breakdown in communication or a lack of following up, if I'm going to be really frank. I have now reported twice, and I know that my ward colleagues, Councillor Cawthorne and Councillor Riley, and I'm going to have to use specific examples, around Ruislip Lido and people being up there in the middle of the week in February at 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning, right? I can assure you the problems at the Lido are not happening in February in the middle of the week at 9 o'clock in the morning. There's some problems there, and my email box is full on a regular basis in the summer. But there's in schools within a 10-minute walk where I know there's interventions taking place almost daily. Now, I'm not suggesting I want to catch all my residents out, but it doesn't seem, despite councillors reporting it, despite us saying not on many occasions, despite it being more than one of us, there doesn't seem to have been an improvement. And I know we shouldn't come with specific examples, but I think it's important to go through. We're here tonight to try and understand how we unpick that and stop some of those things from happening. So, apologies, those are 2 slightly difficult points, but I think they're important ones to understand the relationship between the council and APCOA, but also around how we enforce the motorcycles, as that is something that's not just a problem in Ruislip, it's Uxbridge, Hayes, everywhere.
Thank you. So motorcycles generally can park in our pay and display bays without displaying tickets. They're exempt. So places like Ruislip High Street, there's been specific work this year to change that and to restrict motorcycle parking, which Cabinet have approved, and once the signs have been deployed and the TMO published, then we will be in a position to take action against motorcycles. Delivery riders obviously being the biggest problem, that are permanently clogging up normal pay and display bays. So I'm aware of the perception, but the reality is that the CEOs in most cases, if motorcycles are in the pay and display bays, are not able to issue tickets or enforce against them. We have to change the underlying traffic orders. So areas where that needs to be done need to be looked at by the transport planning team and follow the due process of consultation if Cabinet agree. In relation to the Lido, there is an agreed deployment in winter, in mornings, afternoons, which would see a CEO being in the area at 9 o'clock, even out of peak times. We can change that. If ward councillors, residents don't want it, we do still find non-contraventions. There are restrictions that apply, the yellow lines, etc. So there's an agreed deployment in the summer, which is escalations. There's a agreed deployment in the winter that if it's not meeting resident needs, we're happy to change it. As I mentioned earlier, with the ANPR car, we are reviewing all our deployments, and that is a prime example, perhaps then, of an area. I would have thought it would be reviewed anyway, but we would happily review it if the feedback is there is no need for a CEO in those areas at the times that are currently being deployed.
I think I'm hearing from committee members there needs to maybe be some work that we do working with you, Richard, and that goes to APCOA, because obviously we're not beholden to you, you're not beholden to us, but just sort of like how members can sort of take a more hands-on approach in making suggestions towards things that, especially around schools, Lidos, high streets, etc., etc.
I think we'd welcome that, and certainly as part of the review, that will help us, guide us, so we get things right rather than wait until someone's frustrated and tells us afterwards we're getting it wrong. So thank you.
Okay, I'm really conscious of time that we're now at 10 to 9, and we've still got 2 large agenda items to come. Are members happy for us to move on, or has anybody got anything that's absolutely going to keep them awake at night? Councillor Crowe, I can see that you go on. A nice quick one.
I'll just binge on your generosity today. Thank you very much. Just wanted to know, you mentioned underperformance of your CEOs. So are they working against set targets?
So, I think I mentioned at the beginning, there are no set targets, and we absolutely would not be setting targets for issuing of PCNs. Our target is to drive compliance within the borough. What we do look at is issue rate per hour. So how many PCNs, and it's an industry standard, it's something that is looked at regularly. We look at that in terms of different areas and also individuals, because if one CEO is in Lido one day and issues 10 PCNs and then the next day someone issues 1, what are the reasons? Is there a car park closure? Is there something going on, or is that a training issue with that CEO? So it's not about setting targets, it's about looking at the data and trying to understand whether we are effectively going to the areas of non-compliance more, rather than exactly what members have brought up, that sometimes CEOs that can be seen to be in areas that where they're not going to be of use to the community.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Davies and give everyone each.
Thank you, Chairman. Very, very quick. It's not a question, but I think a site visit would be very welcome to the EBCOA's office to see how that operates, especially with the call centre being there as well. But that wasn't my question. Okay. Very quickly, the table shows on page 58 that there has been a reduction. The table below shows that PCNs issued via CCTV cameras since the start of the contract have reduced as the new cameras were installed in 2024. Are we saying that your cameras have, because you taught residents by removing cameras, that they've got better by 1,000? Because if we have a look, the numbers have gone down by nearly 1,000 in 2025 per month. Is that, so let me just make that clearer, cameras went from 120 cameras down to 75, and we've seen a reduction in 1,000 PCNs. That to me would just stand out, that because we've removed 40 cameras, we're not getting the markup, rather than we've taught drivers how to park properly. Can I just get some clarity on that? So it's the paragraph at the bottom of page 57 and the table at the top of page 58.
Oh, I thought it was because you'd stopped driving, Councillor Davies.
I allow my wife to drive because I have a bad foot. So we can see there's 1,000 difference nearly every month on compared to 2024. But there's been a reduction of cameras. We've gone from 120 to 75, and we're saying that this is because EBCOA and the London Borough of Hillingdon taught drivers how to park correctly, rather than the fact that we've removed 40 cameras. I'm intrigued to see how that's levelled up and how that was compared. Richard?
So the data on the enforcement cameras mainly relates to the introduction of 22 cameras, 16 of which were yellow box junction enforcement cameras, which were new in late 2023, early 2024. And the data from those cameras is very clear. There was high levels of contravention when they first went in, and then it came down quite significantly over the course of the next year. So the reduction in the main is due to the fact that people have recognised that there is an enforcement camera at a location there never used to be, and therefore compliance has improved, which is the point of the cameras. Most of the cameras we've removed have been ones that have been they're old cameras that when you look at the non-compliance rates, the detection rates was very low. They were hard, in many cases, 1 or 2 non-compliance in a month, and so therefore the replacement cost, which is quite high for a camera, was just not justified for the level of non-compliance there appeared to be.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That draws to a close, this agenda item. Two things. Number one, to thank Kenny very much, and Richard, of course, but especially Kenny for being our guest, who I think has answered some difficult questions very diligently and clearly as someone who is on top of his brief. So thank you very much. It would be great, Kenny, if thank you for nodding away and agreeing to a site visit. It'd be also, I think it would be interesting if you would be up for it to write to this committee to tell us a little bit about the work that ABCOA does outside of parking enforcement and other types of enforcement that it offers. I know this is something that my predecessor and now the Cabinet member was interested in. I would certainly be interested as the chair of the Scrutiny Committee, and I expect other members would be interested in the things that ABCOA could deliver potentially around enforcement. That's not a promise on anything, that's just as interest to a committee that scrutinises the Cabinet. You are absolutely welcome to leave us and go home. Thank you very, very much, and have a safe journey home. Ian, you always seem to be near the end. I think my promise to you will be to get you further up the agenda in the near future. We're now going to move on to our agenda item on the climate change plan. Thank you very much for what is a comprehensive and actually really interesting and very thorough report. I've read an awful lot about trees, etc., and I'm sure some of that will come out in the questioning. Would any members like to kick off with the question? Councillor Core.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ian. How confident are we that we will meet our climate change targets and the deadlines? Thank you.
That's an easy one to start with, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. It's tough. I mean, that's it's difficult to give a degree of confidence at this stage because we're in the process of doing a trend analysis, which sort of analyses the routes to achieving that carbon neutral target by 2030, but it's sort of inherent within the rest of the activity of the council and the situation that all local authorities find themselves in. I think it's important to understand that this isn't a statutory function of councils, despite the massive challenge that faces us all and the importance of it. It's still not a statutory function, so it's not it's discretionary. And there are a lot of other competing pressures for this. So the short answer is it's going to be very tough to hit those targets, but the ambition is still there to achieve them. And I think you can see from the report that we are making, some hefty progress, and we have done since we've stated or declared the climate emergency, and that work continues on. We've got a good programme of activity for this coming year. We've just released some of the Section 106 money that's secured for carbon reduction work. So that sits outside of the council's normal general fund and secured from developers. So we've just released about 1.5 million of that to do quite a lot of community-facing work, which we identified as an area that needed a bit of development from last time. So this will lead us to a strong performance against those targets, but at this point in time, without a trend analysis, it's difficult for us to say what are the roads to reaching that and how much is it really going to cost us. But it will be tough, and it will be tough for all local authorities, particularly in the current situation that we find ourselves in.
Thank you. Councillor Cole?
What are the major challenges in terms of fleet? And if we go electric, will we have the capacity to keep those vehicles electric?
So as you can see from our performance on fleet, tracking progress on that has been very difficult because we don't yet have dashboards to clearly track exactly how much mileage, how much GPS tracks, and then it goes onto a dashboard, which then you work out the mileage, the fuel usage, and then you can work out carbon footprint from that. The other problem with fleet is, refuse vehicles, big vehicles, DEV versions of those are extraordinarily expensive. So then you're into a position of, telling residents we're spending quite a lot of money on an electric vehicle, refuse collection, which is then meaning we're not going to do other things. So there's the question there, and the gain from that is probably not quite as important as what we could do with that money at this moment in time. So there is a significant challenge about converting all our, heavy diesel vehicles, trucks to electric. There's also the infrastructure that's necessary to support all that. That's still not in place. So there is a likelihood that, and we said this from the outset, that our fleet would be carrying a carbon footprint by the time of 2030. So this is where offsetting comes in. But I know we're going through a regular fleet replacement program, so we've replaced a lot of diesel vans with a lot of electric vehicle charging, if you go down to the basement car park, there's a lot of electric vehicles down there that support our staff doing their work. But the big ticket items, the lorries, the refuse trucks, they're likely to not be EV by the time 2030 comes around, just purely because of the replacement costs and the ability to keep them on the road. So that means we then have to look at carbon offsetting that carbon footprint that is still essentially the shortfall in 2030.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dott.
Thank you, Chair. In cost effectiveness, how are initiatives such as air carbon monitoring or energy efficiency schemes being evaluated for cost effectiveness?
And that's a really good point about carbon reduction. I think what we try to do at the council is not just bolt on carbon savings. There has to be a monetary saving for our taxpayers. So everything that we look at in terms of carbon saving was also ideally aiming to reduce diesel consumption, for example, in fleet vehicles, or energy purchasing, particularly at this volatile energy purchasing time. The cost of energy is going up massively. So, for example, the work in the Civic Centre that we've done to replace a lot of our gas boilers with air source heat pumps, that puts us in really good stead to exploit savings on the national grid coming forward. So it is always embedded within the long-term trajectory of understanding how we save carbon, is how do we save the funding for the residents as well. And I think that's a really important point, Councillor. This isn't just all about carbon, this is about saving money for our residents as well, so we can achieve two really good outcomes at the same time.
Any follow-up, Councillor Dott? Councillor Darren Davies.
Thank you, Chairman. A very quick one. Has the council looked at hydrogen fleet? Is that something that we've looked at? Is that something that even exists?
It's caught me off guard, that question, because I'm not entirely up to speed with hydrogen fleet vehicles, but as I understand it, they are, they're at the pilot stage.
Yeah.
The real challenge for us is moving to electric vehicles for some of those larger fleet items. That's more realistic where we would go. I know that Heathrow have been trialling hydrogen vehicles on their airside, but that hasn't actually filtered through to us at the council yet. The challenge is on EVs at this moment in time. Hydrogen may well be the answer in the future, but as I understand it, that's not currently on our agenda.
Yep.
Councillor Davies?
Yeah, I have a follow-up. How is Heathrow going to affect us? Is that going to delay our progress? Especially my thinking behind that is not so much the development of the third runway, but also the Cranford Park agreement. So now that's gone, the flight paths are changed, and if the third runway was to come in, we would have more planes over south to north rather than what we have at the moment. So will that slow the progression down, or will that have any hindrance?
How will Heathrow expansion affect us? I think there's a whole session there, Chair. So in terms of ending the Cranford agreement, which went through the planning process just recently, that's the same amount of planes, so it's within the current air traffic movement cap of 480,000 a year, so it's just shifting planes around. So there's no additional carbon associated with that. The third runway is obviously massive, and how you actually calculate carbon performance of those aircraft, particularly when they go into international airspace, and then the emissions as they take off from one country and land in ours. I mean, it's far bigger than anything that this council can get its head around. I think that's a matter for central government. So our targets are predominantly associated with our own operational requirements. By 2035, we've also looked at borough-wide emissions and just reporting on those and understanding what they look like. So it's not just the airport sits unfortunately in the south of the borough in terms of carbon, but it's all the other transport routes in the borough, so the M4, the M25, all these are massive sources of carbon for us, but our actions are not going to be able to touch them. We're not statutory undertakers for those road networks. We don't have any influence over them to some extent, and certainly on the airport that's outside our remit. But it will be massive and will be a massive concern for the decision making, and as officers will be making that case as the proposals develop.
Councillor Gohill.
Thank you. My first question is, has the council considered the increased paper mile costs when we're looking at modernising our fleet? Likely it's going to be implemented around 2028 time as announced in the budget. I was just wondering if we've factored in the cost of those over the lifetime of the vehicle and the amount of miles that electric cars and plug-in hybrid cars would also do around the borough.
I mean, it's an excellent question. I think there's, as you'll see from the report, there's a lot of work for us to do on fleet. We still don't track the carbon performance of our existing fleet or those in the future. So a bit of an evasive answer, Councillor, because we just don't know at this moment in time. There's a body of work coming in this year, calendar year, to try and do a bit more on fleet and trend analysis to determine what happens in the coming years. So it's a bit early to answer that question, unfortunately. But Chair, perhaps one to note for this session, the equivalent session coming forth, I think would probably a point to take forward.
A good point, Councillor Gohill. Do you have a follow-up?
A separate question, if that's all right. And it was just regarding any kind of, how much does our capital programme kind of depend on any external funding or capital funding? And I guess, I suppose the follow-up is, how much of our delivery is contingent on continuing to receive said funding if we do?
So I think, again, the way that we've always tried to the operating model of how we do this is to try and embed carbon save within our existing structure, so that it's not. The aim is not to spend an excessive amount of money to bolt on carbon saving to existing works. It's tried to embed too. So, for example, the decent home standards that was referred to earlier, that's also part of our carbon saving agenda. So we have to achieve certain targets. That allows us to go into buildings and do a bit more work on energy efficiency to achieve carbon savings and improve the homes for our tenants and residents. Elsewhere, a lot of it is hoping to secure grant funding, because, as I said, it's not a statutory function of the council, so there is no new burdens. There's no funding available from the government to achieve these targets. These are discretionary. So we have to be quite clever and innovative on that. And we've had the public sector decarbonisation scheme for the Civic Centre, which was a magnificent amount of money coming from central government. That's grant funded and was supplemented by developer contributions from Section 106. So that was all largely outside of council general funds. And it's about trying to find that, replicate that kind of approach elsewhere. Grant funding is also drying up, so we just have to be a bit careful of that. But we do have a fairly hefty pot of money from Section 106, and as I said, we've got £1.5 million this year, along with our existing arrangements for improving housing stock, disposal. All the carbon generally gets considered in all those kind of processes. So it's not all contingent on grant funding, but that is very, very useful.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Chair. Have any future plan we install more car charging in the council areas or parking spaces? Also, the second question is, have any plan for how many trees we planted every year, so control the climate? Would you please give the details for that?
So within the report, you will see that we have signed up to a West London EV charging scheme, and we have our own air quality Section 106 contributions as well, which we put to that. We have an EV strategy, and I think we've talked about that in the past, Chair, that we probably need to be a little bit more ambitious on that. I think that's fair to say. So that work is ongoing. So So you will start to see more EV charging areas, EV charging points rolled out across the borough, and I think one of the issues is on-street availability. So, you know, a lot of them are in car parks, but the real game changer is when the council can put charging stations on streets for residents. So that's something that we also have to consider. In terms of trees, you'll see again in the report that we, despite being already one of the greenest London boroughs, we do a lot of extra tree planting. There's obviously long-term maintenance costs with that that needs to be considered, but we're also looking at delivering climate parks, which is, you know, more climate resilient spaces. You know, we have a lot of green space in the borough that is really well managed, but how we use those green spaces has changed. Particularly, we saw from this year where we had a lot of heat waves, so we need more cool spaces in those parks, which allows us to plant more trees, which allows us to have more areas of shade. So they're the kind of things that we're looking at now in our green spaces, so that we do two things. We secure more carbon sequestration, so absorption through trees, as well as improving spaces for the residents as to adapt to the changing climate, hotter summers in particular, as we had last year.
Do you have any follow-up, Councillor Singh? Does any other member have a question? I just wanted to ask a question about trees, if that was all right. I often get residents raise concerns that, and I'm going to use this in like simple language, that if somebody wasn't a tree expert, was like big old tree gets cut down that looks really nice and has probably done lots for the environment over many years, and then really little tree it gets replaced with, and it doesn't feel like that's the correct replacement for the environment. What methods or metrics do we use to measure the replacement of trees when it's either felled because it's died, but we've got to get rid of it because we're building something really important there that residents are supporting? How do we go about making those decisions? There was talk about tree planting in the report. I just wanted to eke out how those decisions are made.
So in the grand scheme of things, one big tree, using that technical term, is relatively minuscule in the concept of the whole. You know, what we're talking about in terms of tons of carbon. But what we do is plant tens of thousands of trees per year. So our tree loss rate is nowhere near the amount that we plant every year. So we haven't done the offset as to what one big tree works out as to the thousands of smaller trees that we plant, and that's work that we can certainly look at. But I think, you know, just on the face of it, the amount that we plant every year offsets any of those that we lose. We also require developers, whenever we lose trees through that, we also require through biodiversity net gain for the increase of tree planting, hopefully on site or elsewhere. And there's a load more tree planting that we've secured through HS2 as well. So, you know, hundreds of thousands of trees. You know, we're not in tens of thousands anymore, we're in hundreds of thousands of trees up in that neck of the woods, pardon the pun, which is also, you know, massive for us. So, you know, the next time you see one tree being lopped down, it is very sad. And so, you know, especially big trees in local areas, they're more than just carbon benefits. They have so many extra benefits, and that's why we look to plant some more. But I think across the borough, the amount of tree planting that we do is pretty exceptional, and should be cherished, really. Although it does have implications for Dan's budgets on long-term maintenance, so something to look at.
In terms of the environment and climate, the borough is incredibly lucky to have one of only two, I believe, triple SIs in the terms of Ruislip Woods in the borough, which is obviously a huge asset, and that is very much a lot of the work that goes on there around not only looking after the woods, but some of the climate action is led by volunteers at the Ruislip Woods Trust and others. How do we work across the borough on many of our climate action plans with volunteers and volunteer groups? And I saw something about the People's Assembly that we were potentially setting up. Could you tell us a little bit about how we work with voluntary groups under the earth, etc., to help deliver these climate initiatives?
Yes, so I have a monthly meeting with Friends of the Earth, and we work with other partners and other groups like that. not as much as we would like to, and I think we identified that as an area for development in the annual review of the Strategic Climate Action Plan, which is why we've put quite a bit of funding aside for this year to do more community facing. We worked with Friends of the Earth, and they delivered their the Cleaner Greener Festival that took place in Uxbridge at the end of last year, which was well received. The intention is to work with that this year, build on it, and spread it a bit wider. So we've put some Section 106 funding aside to be able to do that. In terms of Ruislip Woods, that's another area of green space management that we're currently looking at, working with the trustees there to come up with an innovative and improved approach to managing that woodland. As we've lost woodland officers and resources become tight, we have to be a little bit more innovative as how we work with volunteer groups to allow us to exploit external funding, and to ultimately, Ruislip Woods is absolutely magnificent. There's nothing, it's very rare in London to have that, and I think again we should cherish that as a resource for us, and we should make more of it. And I think working more closely with the volunteer groups and the trustees will allow us to do that.
Fantastic. Right. Thank you very much. We'll bring that agenda item to a close. We're getting to the end in what has been a very, very meaty agenda, I think. So I thank members and officers for bearing with us. Flood investigations, or flooding report. Do I have any questions from members? Councillor Core, flooders with a question.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just wanted to know, we've listed the recent incidents of flooding, which have been way too many compared to previous years. What lessons have we learned from this?
Well, the first lesson is it's getting worse. Climate's changing. These are happening on a more regular basis. I think the thing about flooding is, and the events of September last year are still, or 24 now actually, are still fresh in our minds. I think, that was probably one of the worst events we've seen here in recent times. Pretty horrific for those residents, particularly in Ruislip and Ickenham, who suffered massively. It's always a difficult subject to engage with because, it is so emotive and residents are so impacted by flooding, and, for years nothing happens, and then one day, next thing you know, you are no longer in your home, move into temporary accommodation, and you have to clear out a load of personal belongings, and it is horrific. The lessons learned from that are that we are struggling to keep pace with keeping on top of managing flood risk. We're dealing with Thames Water. We're dealing with a drainage network that's getting older. Their funding is drying up to some extent, so it's managing an outdated asset. So what we've learned from that is we have to be a bit more innovative with how we deal with with flood risk management, and we do that largely now through our green spaces. So the council here has diverted more of its resource to winning funding from the Environment Agency to secure projects on our own green space, and you can see that we've got 13 current projects, a very small team of mine that delivers those. So that's really impressive for us to be able to deliver so many projects, and that's way more comparable than some of our neighbouring authorities. So that's the lesson learned, is we have to use our green space to manage flood risk, and we are doing that. We're also, unfortunately, a bit more reactive in terms of flooding. We've got about 30,000 properties at risk of flooding throughout the entire borough. Picking the ones that are going to be flooded next is very difficult. We had flooding in 2016 on referendum day, as so happens to have been. That was in one part of Ruislip, and that was a weather event not too dissimilar to what we had in 2024. But the wind conditions, the rain fell on a slightly different part of the catchment, and an entirely different area flooded. Predicting that is virtually impossible. So I know it's really, really unfortunate for our residents. We do have some proactive projects where we've identified concerns for the future, where we think they might be hit by flooding if it goes. But a lot of it is reactive, and that's really unfortunate for our residents because it means they've flooded for us to be able to respond. But it's just the nature of it, and it's just unfortunate that it works that way. But I think you can see from the report and the recommendations that when it does flood, we take this really seriously, and we've already started. Ruislip Gardens, for example, was over 100 properties flooded there, absolutely massive. We've been out and we've seen them. We've already put in place a flood action group. We've already got communication with them, and we've already identified a project nearby which will hopefully help that in the future. So I think when we react pretty well, but it's trying to find the next place that's going to flood is virtually impossible. So we do the best we can with the limited funding that we have.
Thank you. If we were funded properly, do you think we could monitor the risks better and be better prepared? Like, would it help our preparedness?
I mean, yes, having any extra information would help. Having extra funding would also obviously massively help. But at the end of the day, it's weather dependent. So we did a scheme at Bessingby Park not too long ago, which was to protect in a 1 in 5 year event, so a very small scale flood incident. The event that we had in 2024 was 1 in 30 year event. So that doesn't mean it's going to happen once every 30 years. That just basically relates to the amount of rainfall that comes down and the flow in the river. You can get several of those in 1 year. But that just illustrates the kind of rainfall that we had in 2024. A month's worth of rain fell in a day. And when that happens, it's very difficult to understand exactly what's going to happen. It depends on what the infrastructure is doing at that moment in time. So if it happens normally in rainy season, when the leaves have come off and they're all still on the roads, you've got to get out there and clean those up before it rains. When's it going to rain? So all this is so complicated to manage in advance. We do the best we can with the funds we've got, and it is, it's unfortunate, Chair, that we sit here with, having been on the back of this kind of flooding, and it's difficult to say, well, it's not going to happen again, because we just can't promise that. So yeah, it's very difficult, and it's always difficult to come in front of a select committee like this and defend what we do in terms of flood risk, but equally at the same time say, if it rains heavily for a very long period of time, places will flood. And that's one of the things that we've learned from this as well, is that we need to let residents know, give them more information about if they are at risk of flooding, and put more on residents to be able to take responsibility for themselves to do some of their own protection work, because we just can't keep pace with where it's flooding at this moment in time.
Thank you, Ian. I am conscious time's pressing on. I've seen Councillor Gohill, Dot and Davis indicate. Is anybody else indicating? No. Okay, we'll start with Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chair. I was just hoping to get a bit more of a gauge on areas that we can control. So I'm talking mainly about flooding where gullies have been blocked and drains have been blocked, which is causing flooding. It's a particular problem in my ward, and I have to keep re-raising it, and I'm sure I'm probably going to be raising it again tomorrow morning after seeing how the storms and the rain's been today. I just wanted, I know that we undertake drains and gullies on like a yearly basis. They're sort of inspected, but my question is around times at which we have to go to external bodies like Thames Water, and at those times, do we charge Thames Water for the admin work that we undertake when we're reporting these issues to them and chasing them? Because quite often residents don't know that it actually isn't us who's meant to be clearing them. It's meant to be the water companies. Some are making extortionate amounts of profit that aren't actually doing these jobs, and it's taxpayer money that we're having to use as admin work to chase them. I'm wondering if we're charging them to get our money back from them, because if not, we should be.
So we work closely with Thames Water as best we can. I think that what you've identified there is the way that our drains operate and who's in charge of managing those drains. So our gullies normally drain into a Thames Water network, which drains into a river. So the river's managed by the Environment Agency, Thames Water network by them, and management of drainage off the highways is ourselves. Now at times you have property drains going into Thames Water networks over our carriageways. That water is technically Thames Water to manage. They'll say it's ours, we'll say it's theirs, and then you're into the you do this, we do that, and then there's a big argument, and it happens every single time, and it's extremely frustrating. The system is basically set up to have that argument every single time. So a lot of those reports that go to Thames Water send them back to us and say it's not ours. We say it's not ours. So that's everywhere. That's just because that's how the system has been designed, and it's it's not helpful, and it's awful because we don't get the outcomes. So in terms of reporting to Thames Water, I don't believe that those the cost of reporting that is covered. I think there is a lot of education to do as to who should be reporting out when, and there's a lot more work that we can do on coordinated reporting, but that requires Thames Water to come to the party and play with us. They are, I have to be careful what I say, Chair, but they are notoriously difficult to engage with on these matters because of they have their own statutory responsibilities, and at the end of the day they'll tell you, and rightly so, it's their customers' money that they need to spend wisely. The council, obviously, as Highways Department, has responsibilities as well. So I'm not going to pretend that it's all straightforward and working swimmingly. I think there are a lot of problems there that still need to be resolved, but it does require Thames Water to assist us. But we do work closely as best we can with them, and we do know this is a problem, and this is, the common reporting tool is something that is the panacea for everyone, and it's still some distance off, unfortunately.
I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for Thames Water because I think we'll be here for, I think I've run out of breath, to be honest. But I think my follow-up question is, in areas where they kind of play the he said, she said game, and we end up having to go to a site to unblock these drains and find it was their issue, do we claim back? Can we be pushing to do that a bit more? Because actually it's not fair. It's not fair on the council and for taxpayers, and actually the resource that's there could be going towards things like a new gauge at Deaconham Stream, for example. Our money could effectively be spent efficiently elsewhere if we're not having to go back to them. So I'm just wondering if there's any kind of recourse to doing that, and obviously within the remits of wanting to keep a constructive relationship with them as well. But I think there is a balance that can be struck.
So again, an excellent point, and highlights the significant concerns around a particular point for residents. So as a lead local flood authority, we try and bang the heads of those statutory undertakes. So the Highways Department of the local authority is a risk management authority, Thames Water a risk management authority, and my team is certainly the lead local flood authority who's responsible for trying to get them to talk about these matters. So I will take that back to our Highways team and I'll give you a more detailed answer as to how we recover costs if we end up cleaning out their network. But I am aware as well that the operational team of Thames Water have been very good and have responded very well to certain requests that we've had where they've cleared some of our network out as well. So there is a lot of collaboration at an operational level because we all know the consequences. It's more strategic planning where we have a significant problem between the two.
Councillor Dott.
Thank you, Chair. No, I withdraw my question because Ian already covered the
Thank you, Councillor Dott. Councillor Davies.
Thank you. Do we, flooding-wise, locally, I've seen in my own ward of Charleville and especially in Hayes and Harlington, with the developments that we're allowing now, so I see a lot more concrete being used, we're losing a lot more of the water table, a lot more drainage. Is there plans to add that into our local plan that we have to leave a percentage, say I want to concrete my front garden and I have to leave 10% for drainage or surface water drainage? Is that something that we're looking at or not in the pipeline?
So for new development, all new development basically has to achieve greenfield runoff rate, so almost secure as much water in a 1 in 100 year flood event. So in theory, in a big event, water shouldn't be running off those developments. It should be going to a sustainable drainage system, underground tanks, ideally above ground sustainable drainage system that have many other benefits, for wildlife and various things like that. So rain gardens are a prime example. The big issue for us is not necessarily the new developments, because there's planning policy that allows us to tackle those in terms of restricting runoff from them. It's existing dwellings, it's long-standing problems that a lot of people have paved over their front drive, and that's across the whole area. So, when we did the site visits for Ruislip Gardens, I'm not picking on them, I'm just using those as an illustration. A lot of drop curbs there, a lot of paved driveways, and all that has reduced the amount of water that can be absorbed into the ground. That we can't do anything about that now. That problem is now embedded in the system, and that's also another reason why we've got these emerging, increasing problems. Is because we're dealing with this legacy issue, and that's another thing that we're trying to educate and do more work with residents. Okay, you have a paved driveway. Do you have a water butt that collects water from the roof? I mean, it's a small amount, but you add that up across 100, 200 properties, starts to add up, starts to make a bit of a difference. So that's where we're focusing attention at this moment in time.
Okay, Councillor Singh, and then I'm going to wrap up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, officer. Actually, my question is, who's responsible to clean the canals or rivers? Because in the local canal, the people, they dump their mattresses or wooden pallets or something like that. So we are responsible for that, or council, or the Thames Water?
So the canals are managed by the Canals and River Trust.
Okay.
So just to be clear, in terms of canals, they generally don't have a floodplain attached to it because the water levels are artificially managed, if you like, or man-made, or man-managed, person-managed. Rivers are different. Rivers are managed by the Environment Agency, and I know that's one of the things that gets talked about every time we have a flood event, is that the Environment Agency should dredge more, but the reality is that that costs a hell of a lot of money, and almost within a year it can silt up again. So that's not necessarily the answer in terms of flood risk management. It's a short-term measure that costs too much money, that then prevents money being spent on long-term solutions. So that's another part of the education that we have to do with residents about what can be done. Managing expectations, that's not necessarily the answer. But managing the rivers is the Environment Agency's function. But there is another issue there as well, that they're responsible for river maintenance, if you like, but actually a lot of it comes down to whoever owns that watercourse. And a lot of residents don't even know that they own watercourses, which includes main rivers, normally up to the centre line. So that's riparian ownership. So if there's blockages, technically it's the responsibility of the resident who owns that section of the river. Not many residents know that they might have to remove a tree that's blocking a river, or even that they own up to the centre line. So this is all, going back to Councillor Gohill's point about who's managing what, this is all part of the really complicated structure of flood risk management that we as lead local flood authority have to try and navigate our way through.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a couple of small bits from me. Just right to me offline, if you want to 11.24, which is to do with the swale in the pond at Brook Drive. I think that predated the referendum issue, the referendum flood. And maybe if we could just clarify that, and maybe just tidy up the wording, just so that's on there. Just as an observation, I might be wrong, Ian, but I've been spoken to a lot about this. It predates me as a councillor for sure, but I just wanted to make sure it was accurate. I just wanted to end on how we engage with the flag groups. Like, we've got some really good flag groups with some very passionate people who are experts on flooding. But I'm also really conscious that whilst we need those expert voices to be heard and to have a place, we don't want them to drown out some of the people who have got genuine concerns that maybe don't sit and think about flooding every day of the week. They might not be experts in the area, and actually, we don't want the loudest voices to squash the ones who maybe don't have the knowledge. How are we going to go around making sure there's a good fairness in the distribution of voices, but also we're using the expertise within the flag groups to help support the decision making that we make?
I mean, that's an excellent point, Chair, because the flood action groups are they're a front line into the communities that experience the flooding. At the end of the day, they're the ones who experience it. They're the ones who we need to work with, not them work with us. You're absolutely right. We have set up 2 new flags, one at Whitby Road, just at the south of Bessenby Park, because that's regularly flooded. We obviously got the one at Brook Drive. We set a new one up at Ruislip Gardens, and they're all different. The residents over at Brook Drive have had long-term flooding, and as you know, I've made a note of the reference that you've talked about there, but I know their flooding predates 2016. You know, there's historic flooding, legacy flooding there. And the knowledge from residents is absolutely crucial. So when we did the flood investigation, talking to residents is first and foremost the most important thing. Where does water come from? Where does it flow? Where does it come out of? How did it get to your property? We don't know that. We have models. Working with the residents is absolutely crucial. And their knowledge and tapping into it is absolutely vital. But it's really important that everyone gets a chance to say on that. So we've worked closely with Councillor Labour and now obviously Councillor Bridges on the flood action groups for Islip Gardens, and we'll continue to work closely with them and improve the way that we engage with them.
Ian, thank you very much for staying and for... Councillor Corgon, very quickly.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for providing us with acronyms and abbreviations. Thank you.
Absolutely, agree with that 100%. Thank you for that. We should note that every officer should have to do that. Ian has led the way. Ian, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to make an absolute promise to you that if you come here again to this committee before May, we'll make sure that you're higher up the agenda. It always seems you seem to be sort of like like a good show. You are the thing that comes at the end. So thank you very much for your time, and you're welcome to leave. Okay, members, I'll now move on to agenda item 11, the forward plan.
Agreed.
On the work programme, I just wanted to, whilst it's agreed, obviously note some of the changes that I spoke about earlier, but also just recognise the work that this committee did in and around fun fairs and circuses, and I understand the deposit scheme is now in place, and that was something that cross-party and from this committee was borne out. So I think it just goes to show that working collaboratively, we can come up with good things, and that'll be protecting our land, and we're taking those deposits from those fun fairs and those circuses. So a big thank you to you all. Does anybody have any comments on the work programme? Okay, I draw to a close that meeting. Thank you very much for sticking with me, members. We've got it done in 2.5 hours. We did a lot this evening, and I think we've really challenged officers well. So a good meeting and a good night.